Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Time for a Week 9 preview. Our bellies are stuffed with Thanksgiving food. Are you stuffed? I'm pretty stuffed.
Very much so.
Yeah, very.
And all the leftovers now.
Yeah, very stuffed. Watched a lot of hockey too. A lot of disappointment. I rooted for Carey Price twice. My heart was broken, as is my matchup. Bob and Carey Price on the same team. It's been a fun week. It's been a fun season.
Sounds like it.
Okay, so let's jump into the week review. Week 9, there's a lot of stuff to go over. I have a lot of suggestions. We have some good drop candidates, a lot to go over. So let's just jump into it. You take us into your first week review, and then I'll go into mine.
All right, my first one is actually jumping back to Toronto, which I think we already covered the Babcock stuff enough. But what I'm interested in is why is Ilya Mikheyev still not getting any power play time? You'd think that. I feel like he's done well enough to have at least earned power play 2, and yet he's played the entire season with no power play time. And even with the new coaching staff, he still isn't getting any. Despite the fact that his time on ice is increasing. I mean, he's playing with Tavares now, which might be because of Marner, but I mean, I could see an avenue where Hyman is the one that gets demoted from the line when Marner comes back. But I mean, I don't know. Mikheyev seems to be very versatile, so having him in the third line makes sense too. But I feel like they're limiting his offensive potential a bit, especially on the power play.
Especially given just how good he's been this season. I mean, that line of Hyman, Mikheyev, and John Tavares was fantastic over the last 3 games. I mean, all the lines have been so much better since Babcock left. But Mikheyev all season has been a pretty good offensive force. And like I'm shocked that he doesn't get power play time. He gets very, very little. Like he played 2% over the last 3 games.
Yeah,
but
he's played 7 seconds on average. Like that's not power play time. That's the power play's ending and they're putting a regular line out stuff.
Yeah, I don't get why exactly I don't know why that's happening. And then for my first thing of the week review, I think it's impossible to overlook what's happening in the hockey world in terms of the Bill Peters, Akeem Aliu story, and everything that's coming out from different players. Daniel Carcillo sharing things. It's been pretty nuts. This is one of the craziest things I'd say that has happened in hockey in a while. It makes it feel a little bit like the NFL and the NBA. Usually NHL feels like squeaky clean compared to those other ones. But I guess this kind of shed light that it's not as squeaky clean as it seems on the exterior. Yeah, I mean, it's an insane story. Bill Peters is now out, rightfully so. And, I think this is an opportunity for all of us in the hockey world to kind of take a step back and learn a little bit, pull back the covers and see that, hockey, while we want hockey to be for everyone, we've got a long way to go there. I think you can both have progress and issues at the same time. And I think it starts, especially from a culture perspective, from all of us who play. I've heard things in locker rooms, and admittedly, honestly, I've been quiet. When you don't have, sometimes I just say, you know what, I'm gonna let it slide. There's no point bringing something up, and that was cowardly. That's cowardly on my part, and I need to do a better job too of in locker rooms during pickup hockey or whatever, calling it out and not just sitting idle, because silence is also in a way complicit, right? And if you play, I think if you play NHL, if you play Chell, I mean, it's almost impossible to not do some kind of drop-in game and not hear racial slurs and not hear misogynistic things.
That's just the gaming in general for whatever reason.
But I think
anonymity makes people not good people, typically.
But Chell in particular is so toxic. It's just so. I mean, there's guys who will make there's multiple people who will make all black characters and call it like Gorilla Man or something like that. Like, there's just so many racial things in there and the game, and they don't clean it up. They've never made an attempt to clean it up. And that's, so many kids are exposed to that. And then as far as the Akeem Aliu story, so there's the racism issue. And then I think the second thing that's really sad, and I think that this is, again, another learning opportunity and kind of time to step back for a lot of people who are in a management or in a power position. You can take a step back and see, is your culture, is your place, your environment one in which people can come to you and you're willing to learn, take that in, and change? Are people able to come forward and say things? Because I think that's the saddest thing about this story, from the Akeem Aliu story and what we're hearing from other players, is that it's pretty clear that as a rookie and as you're coming up, and even with the Marner story, honestly, it's sad that you can go to management, and the same thing happened in the Hurricanes when Bill Peters kicked players. Like, people went, they were either afraid that them coming out and sharing something very important would get their career detracked or off the right track, or they felt that something would happen to them. And I think that's sad. I think it's sad that people, especially for minorities, and you have Wayne Simmons tweeting out that like he's faced racial slurs multiple times, and they don't feel comfortable coming out and saying something.
No,
And
Evander Kane's been saying stuff forever, to be fair.
and Evander Kane has
Loudly.
always been about it. And it's, and I think that's the second saddest part of this whole story that I think is kind of being overlooked is, yes, all this stuff has happened, but there's no good outlet for players. And if you see this at the NHL level, imagine what that must be in the minors or in juniors or on just a youth hockey team. And I'm not saying that all of hockey is toxic, right? I know there's incredible coaches, incredible players, a lot of people doing really good things. There's the You Can Play movement. There is a lot of good happening. But at the same time, I think we have to take a step back and say that there's issues. And I think as parents, as coaches, people have to kind of make sure that the hockey community is one in which you can come and say, look, there's a problem and something's going to happen. And that you don't feel as a rookie that you can be dehumanized and treated differently just because you're a rookie, and it's going to detract your career or derail your career.
There's what you're looking for.
Yeah, derail is the word I was looking for. But I think that's the biggest issue here. And I'm, the Bill Peters, to me, the first thing that came to mind from that story to me was, okay, yeah, obviously there's problems in the NHL. He kicked players and all that. But like, we've been hearing this from juniors and minors forever, and nothing has ever happened, And I'm just hoping that from this, organizations and parents and everything will learn from here, maybe to be fans in a different way, to be a little bit more vocal about things that are wrong. And on top of that, hopefully we can create a better place where players can actually come out and say things while they're playing, as opposed to waiting 10 years. Because he has every right to wait those 10 years. But if we look at why he waited those 10 years, multiple players that agreed with him said the same exact thing. I felt that if I came out and said something, it would derail my career. And I think that's super sad. And I think that's one of the big pieces that is missing from this whole conversation, is that there's not an outlet for these players to actually say anything. So yeah, that's all I have to say on the Bill Peters situation. And
so much for the week in review. It's the NHL in review.
It's the NHL in
hockey
review.
organization in review.
I mean, we all have opportunities to grow and get better. And I think I love the hockey community. I love playing. But there have been things, like I said, I've heard things in locker rooms that have made me not necessarily want to play, or makes me not feel comfortable going into locker rooms. And part of that is on me needing to say things. And again, it's an opportunity for all of us to step back and say, you know what, hockey is for everyone, but we've got a long way to go. And all of us, at the end of the day, it's not just the minorities that suffer, right, from this. Of course, they are 100% victims, but at the same time, we all suffer when there's not diversity and there's not inclusion. And this is just facts. This isn't anecdotal. We know for a fact now that worse decisions are made when there is not diversity. And we are worse people when there's not diversity. And so hockey stands a lot to gain from being more diverse and more inclusionary to minorities, to women, to all types of people. So I hope we get there. But again, this is just an opportunity for everyone to take a step back and say, there's a lot we can do here still.
Yeah. How about we move it back to fantasy after that a heavy Thanksgiving meal followed by heavy thoughts. All right. The first thing I'm going to talk, you know what? I'll start heavy too. The Islanders' point streak came to an end.
Yep.
After a pretty, I don't know. I mean, how much can you rag on a team for a bad road trip after going, out 16 or 17 games or how many it was with a point? But California was not nice to them. We're recording this Saturday morning, so they're going to turn it around tonight against Columbus and probably Merzlikins. So as good an opportunity as possible.
So my last one here is going to be about McKinnon. I think that at this point he has to be the obvious MVP, right? And there was a really interesting discussion on Twitter.
McDavid and Draisaitl might have something to say.
Well, this was the interesting discussion on Twitter that I saw, was because we're seeing these pairs develop, right? You see Draisaitl, McDavid, you see Pasternak, Marchand. How does that affect votes eventually, because you would think that potentially you could split votes on Draisaitl, McDavid, and then Pasternak and Marchand, and it's gonna be split. But then you have this one consensus on one team in McKinnon, and that technically might help McKinnon. But it's just, I think it's interesting. The MVP will be really interesting this year, and I think going forward with the way teams are building, in that the votes are going to be split, I think, on pairs. And it's going to be interesting to see which way they go, right? Because if you look at the Pasternak Marchand one, for example, which way do you go? And if you look at the McDavid Draisaitl one, I don't know if there's a good answer on the McDavid Draisaitl one. I think they're both equally valuable at this point, or in terms of voting for MVP, I'd say they're both equally impressive. I think, of course, you give it to McDavid, but they're both.
I don't know. I would actually argue Draisaitl at this point.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm very curious to see how the NHL starts to handle, or the voting, at least voting committee starts to handle these duos.
Well, it's not like they've handled anything particularly well. The awards voting is always kind of a joke.
It's going to come down to wins for skaters.
Yeah, it's going to come down to block shots.
Oh, God.
Stupid.
If only.
Forward block shots. I'm more interested in the pairs that show up in the Razzies, you know?
Oh, yeah.
The worst.
The worst of the worst this year.
Clayton Keller and Phil Kessel. Sorry, everybody.
Bob and
anybody that's with him.
Just Bob, I guess. Yeah, Bob has got to be a front runner for Razzies at the moment. I'd actually throw my own name on the Razzies at this point. Given some of the takes I had earlier in the season, I think Gamby's on the Razzies this year for worst fantasy hockey stuff.
Boston is first in the Atlantic with a 12-point gap already. They have 41 points. Next up is Florida with 29, that's a huge gap. They're also first in the league, but are also the only team so far to not have a regulation loss at home. They're 10-0-4. Talk about dominant. Like, they just can't be beat. Now, a lot is to be said about the ridiculous Rask play, at least to start the season, but and then, of course, Pasta. Just those two alone have pretty much dominated everybody they've played. All right. I'll move us into the injury report. It's a long one. First up, Patrice Bergeron, day-to-day with a lower body injury. Then we've got a couple of concussions, which are never fun. So I didn't put any time frame on them because I don't care what time frame is given. It never seems to matter. It's too hard to predict. Rasmus Dahlin and Dylan Strome are both out with concussions at the moment. Then we've got Andre Burakovsky, day-to-day with an upper body injury because, of course, Colorado can't catch a break lately. Although they do get Rantanen back on tonight, probably before you listen to this, hopefully. Anthony Mantha is day-to-day with, he's more like 2 weeks out with a lower body injury. Jimmy Howard is day-to-day with a middle body injury, one of those rare ones. Don't even know what that means. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is day-to-day with a hand injury. We've got Victor Arvidsson week-to-week with a lower body injury. Jack Hughes is now day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. It may not even keep him out of a game, but it was on the injury list, so I put it in here. Craig Anderson, day-to-day with a lower body injury. Brian Rust, again. I mean, why Pittsburgh sorry. You get Letang back, but you got to lose Rust, who's been amazing lately. Day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. Marc-Andre Fleury is out due to the death of his father. Our thoughts out with him, but that is the reason he's out on personal leave at the moment. And then on the other side of things, we've got Steven Stamkos has returned. Mikko Rantanen, I assume, is returning tonight as he's slated to. Mika Zibanejad returned. Chris Letang returned. Alexander Edler returned. And John Klingberg returned. So we had a lot of notable returns. Also, Rope Hintz, but I mentioned him as probably returning on the last injury report, so I just assumed that I was right on that because he did return in the next game.
Okay, and moving into drop candidates, I'm going to go back to the Hudson River and say PK Subban, defenseman, 81% owned. It's time. I mean, it's been time, but I don't think you're trading him at this point. I don't think you're going to be able to trade him. I think he's virtually droppable in almost every league at this point. His minutes have dwindled yet again. Peripherals are dropping a little bit. It's just not good for him. Yes, Bandit, exactly. That wine. Yeah, that's how I feel about PK Subban. It's not pretty. I think what I maybe suggest with PK Subban is what you might be able to do there is you might be able to target, and I've said this on a few episodes now, but you might be able to target someone just above waiver value. And that might be the way to go with PK Subban, is just try to get rid of him. But instead of going straight to waiver, see if you can get someone that is just above waiver, that is probably a long-term hold, someone recently grabbed. And they're like, I picked him up off waivers. I can sacrifice him for Subban. But for you, you're getting someone way better. A
Yeah.
Pulak might be a good example for maybe. It depends on the team, but Pulak is a good example, I think, of someone who has way more upside at the moment than PK Subban, and someone may be willing to move.
Yeah, it is nice to see him finally on top power play, as an aside. Okay. My first one is also from Jersey. It's Jack Hughes again. Center 48%. He's kind of lost his spot. He shares back top line. I feel like there's a lot of rookies can show on here. And by a lot, I mean him and Kako. But I actually had Kako down as well. But with the Rangers good next week, it's probably not worth dropping him yet, depending on what your waiver looks like, just because you're almost certainly going to get at least 3 starts from him.
Yeah, agreed. My next one here is going to be Jakob Silfverberg, right wing, 38% owned. His shots are way down. His deployment is not what it used to be. In my opinion, he's pretty much droppable at this point and only good for streaming options. I don't think he's worth the 38% ownership. He's droppable and pretty much. A streamer is worth way more than Jakob Silfverberg.
There you go.
Silfverberg.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I liked him early on, it seems like the fire has died out a little bit, and Getzlav is doing things. So, my next one, I've only got one more actually, and I can't believe this player is still this highly owned. Justin Falk. He's 40% owned still.
What?
He hasn't done anything all season.
Why?
You can drop him. You're almost better off not even. You can just drop the entire spot. Just drop him and the spot that he's with, and run a man short, and you're basically doing the same thing.
Why is he 40% owned? I mean, that's got to be inactives, I guess.
Well, I would think that, except for how much I've seen Gusev rise and fall.
That's true.
So maybe it's the people that, I don't know. I guess the guys that drafted, what it could be is auto drafters that were never going to play to begin with, like tester leagues or something. But
potentially,
still, 40% seems high. He's definitely owned by active leagues for some reason. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, he's droppable. So this next one I didn't really expect to ever be on here. But Phil Kessel, right wing.
Oh my God.
80%. So here's my take on Kessel. And I did a bust watch on him, and that has much more detail. But his shots are down. Arizona is not producing. It's hard to make the case that he's worth more than a streamer spot at this point, especially if you include his inconsistency. It's getting very hard to justify the fact that he's this bad. And
would you drop him for Dustin Byfuglien?
No. No. But here, I think the thing is, like, when you take a look at where Kessel is headed, especially with the shots being down, he's probably a 55 to 60 point guy. Like, and on top of that, you're getting a ton of inconsistency. I just don't, and probably
and
a low floor,
peripherals.
like low peripherals. It's not worth it. I think, to me, the way I see Phil Kessel, and I said this on the Bust Watch too, was he's a perfect example of someone who is just past a trade for name value, but it's enough that you can trade above waiver. Like, I think what I see a lot of people saying, like, I said this in the last episode, so I won't go into it too much. But again, like the PK Subban thing is, what I see people make the mistake doing oftentimes is when they're set on dropping a player, for example, Phil Kessel, they aim super high with Phil Kessel, and if they don't get that, they drop. Whereas instead, what you should do is say, okay, fine, nobody wants him, but I'm set on dropping. Let me lower my value for him and see if anyone will bite at something. Like maybe a super buy low candidate or something like that. At worst, that spot still becomes a streamer spot, but you have more upside. And that's what I do with Phil Kessel right now. I think he still holds enough name value that you could go out there and at least target above waiver value. But yeah, it's just, the thing is, I do think he turns it around from where he is right now. But the problem is, I don't see him turning it around to 70 plus. I just don't see the upside, and there's a ton of inconsistency, and so there's not a reason to hold him at this point right now.
So with that, I would argue that there are no skaters on the Coyotes that are long-term holds.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
OEL, like, not really.
Yeah, there's really just not much. I mean, they're virtually good streamer options for who's hot.
I still think Kessel's probably the best skater option, but it's
Agreed.
not saying a lot.
But, you know, I think the thing is when you look at the style that Arizona plays too, though, they don't really need a lot of offense.
Yeah, it's the same deal. Like I feel like the super easy comparison to draw is them and the Islanders have never. I mean, lately that second line is kind of blown up, but typically you'd own Barzell and that's it. And even he was droppable last season. So
Yeah, and even now, like Derek Brassard is down to what 12 minutes or something, and Nick Schmaltz was ownable for a while. Connor Garland, you had
Brassard only played 12 minutes in one game, and I'm not sure that's going to stick.
yeah, but you know, my point is that it's
Yeah.
just different players get hot at different
They all
points,
shake around.
and yeah, and the shooting percentage is naturally low, so there's just not as many points to go around. Yeah, Kessel's a great real
even
life
on the
player.
Islanders, the only one that's truly a pretty much lock for a season long hold is Barzell.
Yeah,
Everybody else is
what's kind of
whatever.
crazy about Kessel is that from an advanced stats perspective, he's actually been their second best skater. He really has.
second best to who?
I believe Keller from an advanced stat.
Really?
Like, yeah.
Keller.
Like how many high danger chances for they create, or while they're on the ice, how many shots for they generate, all different kinds of things, right? Their Corsi for that stuff. Kessel's
I'd
been
love to see what their deployment is.
Kessel's
Though
been one of their
Might
best, but
skew that.
it's just not pretty. Yeah, I stick with what I'm saying with Kessel. I don't think I see him turning it around, getting better, but I don't see him getting back up to anywhere near what he would need to get to be worth it, especially from a consistency standpoint.
Okay, moving into long-term targets, I'm going to start with the opposite of where I wound up with at drop candidates and say Nico Hischier, center 30%, back in as good a position as he can be in. There's obviously the big looming issue of what happens with Taylor Hall, but a long-term hold doesn't necessarily mean you have to hold him until the end of the season. It's just he's probably worth better than a week's worth of roster position. And at 30%, seems like he's been dropped by quite a few teams on a good assist streak, although I don't think he got one in his last game, but he's gotten a bunch of assists lately, due for a couple of goals, and yeah, a decent option depending on your league settings.
Yeah, I picked up Nico Hischier in quite a few leagues at this point. I like him a lot as a center option. I like that he seems to have found his groove, and I don't see him losing that top spot anytime soon. That's the nice thing. It seems like they kind of, although last time I said this, he started getting no points and got dropped off for a little bit. But I think right now he's started to find his groove. He has a decent schedule these next few weeks, if I remember correctly. But I like Nico Hischier, and again, like you said, 30% owned. He's a pretty good center to grab at the moment. My first one is going to be out of Pittsburgh, actually, in John Marino. We haven't talked about him yet.
Really?
This is the first time he showed up on the podcast. He is 4% owned. 6-game point streak, getting 22 minutes a game around, and decent peripherals. And I've watched, I sat down and watched a few Pittsburgh games now because someone a few weeks ago had mentioned John Marino. And I kind of looked into it, and his minutes were a little bit low. It seemed like he was getting lucky. And then I watched some games, and he looked good. He
I noticed him too when they played the Islanders.
Yeah, he passes the eye test, and on top of that, like he's getting the points, and now his minutes are climbing a little bit. I like him quite a bit. I could see him kind of, again, you know, Justin Schultz is out at the moment, and so that might have something to do with it. But I could maybe see him usurping Justin Schultz potentially. He just looks really good, and he's really young. At 4% owned, I would probably take a flyer on him, especially in deeper leagues. You know, at 4%, that means he's probably not owned in your league, most likely. And if a guy like that, you know, for example, if you have Justin Falk, I'd much rather have John Marino in any league. There's a lot of situations. There's a lot of options. I mean, Adam Fox is still out there too, but John Marino has been consistent, whereas Adam Fox and Tony DeAngelo have not, and they are very dependent on the top power play. John Marino's been getting it done at 5-on-5, and that's impressive to me.
Well, I mean, D'Angelo's been getting it done on 5-on-5 also, to be fair.
Yeah, that's
Really
with low
lately.
minutes, though. His minutes are so inconsistent. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, I just don't expect him to keep getting this with those minutes that he's getting. It's one game it's 15, one game it's 20. It's just so all over the place, whereas Marino's been consistently at around 22. Similar deployment, similar line mates, and getting it done. I prefer those players way more to anybody that might be in a line blender normally.
All right. Well, my next one's Adam Fox. D, 21%. He's been on top power play for a while now and has been doing pretty well with it. So the fact that he's only 20% owned still is kind of surprising. His shots have been coming up. His minutes have been climbing a little bit. He actually played 25 minutes in the last game, so he's getting more and more ice time, which was one of my biggest concerns with him to start the season. But I'm happy to see that happen. I like to see the shots too. Everything is pointing in the right direction for him. Again, he is, like you mentioned, a little bit more reliant on the top power play, but it seems like they're going to give him an extended leash there as he's been able to do pretty well as the top power play quarterback.
Yeah, I really like Adam Fox. I had him on my short-term target, mostly because of that top power play. And I only had him short-term is because there's, again, like you said, he's been on top power play for a bit now, but you can never discount the Rangers line blender. You just don't know what they're doing over there. It seems to change a lot. Although now I think that Zibanejad is back, we may see a little bit more consistency out of him. Zibanejad did play 25 minutes the other night, which is insane. But I think that with that, we'll see a little bit more consistency out of Adam Fox in the lines. So I agree with you. I think that right now, Adam Fox is a good long-term hold. And on top of that, the Rangers do have a pretty good schedule for a few weeks here. They'll be a good off-night team. Okay, my next one here is actually Oliver Bjorkstrand, left wing, right wing, 9% owned. He featured on Unsustainably High on Wednesday, but there's a few things that are really promising right now. He played 19 minutes 2 games ago, and then last game he played around 18 minutes. So if that continues, if he continues to see this 19 to 18 minute deployment, I'd absolutely look at him long term. We've known for a long time what his potential as a shooter is. He's always been labeled as a really, really elite shooter. Or not really, really elite. I should not throw out the word elite like that, but he's a very, very good shooter. To be seen if he's elite, but all I've heard about him is how good his shot is. And he's been really, really good. And he's clicking a lot with the line he's on at the moment. And so for me, Oliver Bjorkstrand, especially at 9% owned, left wing, right wing, really good long-term potential ad that could get you some points. At the moment, it's tough to say exactly what his point totals will be. But I think that if he can actually get 19 to 18 minutes, 18 to 19, that's the right order. If he can get that many minutes in a game, I think his ceiling is pretty high. And on top of that, he gets you some pretty good peripherals. So I definitely pay attention to Oliver Bjorkstrand. And I have a feeling that because it's Columbus, for whatever reason, Columbus players sit on the wire for a long time. You can probably kind of sit out on Bjorkstrand for a little bit and see if this continues and then pick him up. Because Columbus players, for whatever reason, do tend to sit on the wire for quite a bit of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely like what he's been doing lately. My last one is Robbie Fabry, left wing, right wing. This is more of a move while Mantha's out. We already know that he's got top power play, but now he's got top line as well. Things haven't been going very well for them. They've only got 2 goals in the last 4 games.
They're awful
as a team, but it's as good a position as Fabry can be in, and I do think that they'll be able to get something done. I hope. At some point, there's just no way they can stay this bad. You know, we were looking at the season when the season started at how bad Ottawa should be, and they're getting a million goals from John Gabriel Pajot, and just I don't know. So you'd think that that hopefully they'll be able to score, average something like 2 goals a game, which is still super low, but that Fabry is going to be more likely to be in on these goals that are expected from the team instead of getting shut out constantly. And he's only 13% owned.
Moving into the week preview, let's start with the schedule. So the teams that play 4 more games, there's no teams that play more than 4 games, but the teams that play 4 games are going to be the Los Angeles Kings, the New York Rangers, the Chicago Blackhawks, the New Jersey Devils, the Vegas Golden Knights, Arizona Coyotes, the Buffalo Sabres, the San Jose Sharks, and the New York Islanders. And teams that play only 2 games are going to be Detroit, Calgary, Nashville, and Vancouver. So Detroit is already hurting you. So again, remember that if you go with that Fabry pickup, you are going to suffer this week. So you might be able to wait on that a little bit. And teams that play 3 off nights are going to be Edmonton, Chicago, the New York Rangers, and the Los Angeles Kings. So a lot to take advantage of this week from an off nights perspective. It's somewhat of a balanced schedule, but at the same time, it's going to be tricky because you have to take a look at it. The off nights are kind of all scattered. And so, for example, on my teams, I have off nights, but the thing is that on some of those off nights, it's like I have a defenseman slot open on this off night, but a forward slot open on this other off night. And so I'd take a look at your schedule before just picking up 4 off nights. Try to play it a little bit as in take a look at a week ahead and see, okay, I have a forward slot here, a defenseman slot here, and not just blindly pick up for the off nights, because you may actually not be able to slot someone in on one of those off nights because it's just a little bit of a really balanced schedule. So even though it's an off night, there's still quite a few teams playing. So I'd be sure to take a look at that. And moving into short-term targets, I'll start, of course, first here with a lot of Rangers. The Rangers have, in my opinion, the best schedule of the week from an off night's perspective. And because of that, there's a lot of things happening right now, a lot of good things happening, especially with Zibanejad coming back. So I have three suggestions here. We already talked about Adam Fox, who is my number one suggestion, but my three after that are going to be Philip Hedl, who's currently playing on the top line with Strome and Panarin, getting a lot of minutes. Unfortunately, second power play, but that 5-on-5 deployment is really, really good. And if that continues, I like him a lot for the rest of the week. Tony DeAngelo is my other one. Second power play with Trouba, really low minutes with no peripherals. I wouldn't bet on his points keeping up, but honestly, at this point, whatever. He's been hot. I just go with the hot hand for the week and see what happens. Fox is my favorite option. But if you miss out on Fox, I really like Tony DeAngelo as a backup option. And then there's Pavel Buchnevich. KZB line is back together. That's Kreider, Zibanejad, and Buchnevich. They're back together. Buchnevich is on the second power play. But I like that KZB line a lot. And Buchnevich has been hot for the season. The downside, of course, is that you don't get peripherals with him. But if you need points, that's where you go.
Yeah, I like all of them. I have a Kreider on my list too, left wing 48% as an option. The Rangers, like you mentioned, best schedule, so it's kind of hard to avoid them. That said, there's a lot of, like you mentioned, the schedule's pretty balanced, so it's going to vary. Like the off nights aren't necessarily off nights for teams in this league, and they're all the on nights, like the heavy game nights, are not that heavy. So there's a decent chance when you look through your roster, you don't really bench much at all or at all this week. So you can be pretty flexible in your pickups and kind of target teams with good matchups as well that play a bunch of games. So the first player that I'm looking to pick up in some of my leagues is Paul Stastny. He plays technically two off nights, which are Monday and Sunday, but he's back. Well, he's been playing with Stone and Pacioretty again and is starting to pick up points again. But what I like is they play the Rangers twice and the Devils once. So
are you implying the Rangers are bad?
Yeah, I am a little bit, yes. And that the Devils are bad. And then the Islanders, who finally, whatever magic was going on there, has kind of fizzled out a little bit. So it seems like there's a good opportunity for them to get some points. They also avoid the only truly heavy night, which is Saturday. So they play Tuesday, Thursday, but you've got a better chance of having a spot for Stastny on those days than you do on Saturday. And yeah, I love their schedule. So Stastny's a guy I'm definitely looking at in a lot of my leagues.
I like that one. Stastny's a sneaky one too because no one's paying attention to him because he's been so bad that no one's actually even looking at him. So that's a good one. I like that a lot. Calvin DeHaan is I have two Chicago Blackhawks here. My first one is Calvin DeHaan, defenseman, 12%. He's a peripheral monster. Gets you a ton of hits and blocks and even some shots. In one of my points leagues, he has like a floor of 1.2 points or something like that most of the nights, which is really good normally, especially for a defenseman. So you're not going to have a high ceiling, but he's a really good floor guy. So that's another interesting option that I like sometimes is, for example, if you know you're going to outstart your opponent already and you already are going to be out projected in points, then what you can do is just pick up a really good floor guy like Calvin DeHaan and guarantee yourself 5 or 6 points, something like that. And so that's why I like Calvin DeHaan. On top of that, if you're in a Cats league, obviously he's going to get you a lot of peripherals. So in my opinion, Calvin DeHaan is one of the best peripheral options for the week. And then there's Jonathan Toews, who is he's a center and 57% owned, shoots a ton and has a high ceiling. And I would wager that Jonathan Toews is one of those weird ones like we've talked about in the past where he's actually probably someone who's available in most sharp leagues, right? If you're in a league that's for money or something like that, he's actually one of those where I could see him being held on inactive or kind of less knowledgeable teams, right? And then it's actually in the leagues that are sharpest that he's available, probably, just because it's hard to drop Jonathan Toews if you don't know a lot about fantasy hockey, you don't listen to podcasts, whatever. You're just like, oh, I can't drop Jonathan Toews. But then if you listen to podcasts, like, okay, well, yeah, Jonathan Toews is meh, I can drop him. And so he actually could be available in your league, even at 57% owned. So I'd take a look. And he's one of the best, I think, high ceiling pickups for the week, as opposed to most other players where normally you pick them up and you're like, okay, I hope they stay hot or they're going to give me a good peripheral floor. Jonathan Toews brings you a lot of shots and the chance at a lot of points. Although he hasn't had a lot of points this season, there's always that opportunity given who he plays with.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually got a Blackhawk as well in Andrew Shaw.
Yep, I like that.
Center right wing. He's playing third line, but he does get top power play lately with Strome out, and he gets a ton of hits. So that's kind of like the big thing with him is he's a peripheral guy, but he got 9 PIMs in his last game, 4 hits. He also shoots a decent amount. He's just like a decent all around stat coverage guy. He's not going to get you like eye popping points or anything unless something crazy happens, but he should get you a good amount of hits and a decent amount of shots, and the opportunity at power play points and PIMs, which is kind of hard to come by.
Yep, agreed. On that same vein as an Andrew Shaw type player, I'm going to go with Dustin Brown, right wing, 37% owned. He's gotten some looks again on that top line with Anze Kopitar. It's been kind of hit or miss, but at the worst, he gets you a lot of peripherals. So he's one of these guys that you could pick up if you're lacking in peripherals and kind of have a hope that he might get top line during this week. But he's not my favorite option. That's why he's at the end of this list specifically. But Dustin Brown is someone that's interesting given his off nights and potential deployment. So now that we've given you suggestions for all the worst teams in the league, essentially, it feels like we covered Detroit. We have a player from Detroit, we have a player from the Rangers, we have a player from the Devils, we have someone from Chicago, from the Los Angeles Kings. All we're missing is to have recommended you Jonathan Quick, but I will not do that probably ever again, honestly. So there you go. That is your week preview. I know, very kind. I'm very kind to Jonathan Quick. After last year's Razzies Awards, I don't think I can be mean to him anymore, honestly. So that's your week preview episode. There's a lot to take advantage of this week. Pay attention to live streams on YouTube. We're also going to be doing some hot hands and bust watches. Brandon's Fantasy Hockey 101 is going to be coming out Monday, so be sure to pay attention to that because that's super helpful. And other than that, thank you for listening, and we will catch you on Wednesday for Unsustainable.
Yep, thanks for listening.